Hi, I'm Ned Cooper from the Australian National University. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm recording this video on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country in Australia and pay respects to elders past and present. Our paper is called a systematic review and thematic analysis of community collaborative approaches to computing research. I'm presenting this paper on behalf of my co-authors, Tiffanie Horne, Courtney Heldreth, Michal Lahav, Jess Holbrook, and Lauren Wilcox from Google, and also Gillian from UC Irvine. So what prompted our research? Well, there's a long history of participatory approaches to computing research in HCI. Over the last 20 years, there's been an increase in publications of community-based approaches to computing research. We use the term community collaborative approaches to refer collectively to the umbrella of work in HCI and computing, which includes action research, community-based participatory research, and related efforts that involve participation as research team members of people from a community of interest throughout research and development. We can see in the chart on this slide that this type of work has really accelerated over the last 5 years. What you see here is the number of computing research articles we identified referring to community collaborative approaches to developing a technological artifact or system. And the publication of such projects has been accompanied by growing calls for computing researchers to work more collaboratively with communities. For example, these come from recent talks by Mary Gray in Sasha Costanza-Chock's book Design Justice, and at a recent participatory approaches to ML workshop at ICML. At the same time, others have noted that participation could go wrong or it could be misused if we don't pay attention to best practices and how people and communities have participated in computing research to date. So we thought it was a good time to take the pulse to ask, how do computing researchers, including HCI researchers, treat community participation? What does this work say about us as a research community and how we work with others? So to do this, we reviewed the discourse available in scholarly research about community collaborative projects published over the last 2 decades. As shown on the slide, the 3 research questions we used to guide our project were: how do computing researchers describe their efforts to involve community stakeholders as co-researchers throughout collaborative research projects? And also, what elements of community collaboration are reported in computing research publications? And what are the cultural and methodological implications of foregrounding those elements? Finally, we asked, how does the content in these publications align with or diverge from the tenets of community collaborative approaches? So this gave us insight into how projects have unfolded, which allowed us to learn from the experiences of other researchers and to identify areas calling for the attention of future HCI researchers and computing research more broadly to fulfill the aspirations of community collaborative approaches. So in the paper, we present 7 themes generated from our inductive analysis of the articles, which we have conceptualized as dimensions. Dimensions are the elements or factors contributing to the holistic participatory engagement of researchers and communities in a project. Within each dimension, we found that tensions can emerge relating to the power and position of researchers and the computing research environment relative to research participants and community members. Our intent is not to resolve these tensions through this review. Rather, we wanted to identify where our research community might need to pay attention to align future practice with the tenets of community collaborative approaches. So the themes presented on the slide and discussed in more detail in the paper track the evolution of a project from establishing community partnerships through to sustaining the results of a project. Today, I want to focus on 2 findings that relate to 3 of the themes highlighted on the slide. Those are defining a community partner, integrating community knowledge, and sharing control. Firstly, the review found that most studies involved community stakeholders after a problem was defined. Researchers tended to rely on their own knowledge to conceptualize a project to be later delivered in partnership with a community. Community partners were then included in ideating solutions to the problems as conceptualized by researchers. And then secondly, there were a few examples of researchers sharing control of data analysis with communities. Action research practitioners argue these two stages, that is conceptualizing a research problem and analyzing data, are the most critical to involve the community to achieve the aims of action research. So the limited involvement of communities in these research stages across the articles suggests a systemic disconnect between the theory and the practice of community collaborative approaches as reported in computing research. So this study is about taking the pulse on research to date, but importantly, it's also an invitation. We want to invite the HCI community into a larger discussion about how to better support community collaborative approaches. In the paper, we argue that structural reform to the research and publication of this type of work in HCI is required to address the systemic disconnect discussed previously. We ask, how could resources for research support engagement with communities to conceptualize research projects rather than specifying an outcome for researchers to achieve from a project? And also, how could publication processes encourage reporting on the development of community members' skills in data analysis and technology development, rather than just the validity and reliability of experimental results? We think that we as a field need to catalyse a research agenda to study the systemic issues that restrict HCI researchers and computing more broadly from achieving the goals of this type of work. We present specific methodological proposals in the paper to realise this agenda. These include proposals to develop processes that facilitate contestability of HCI research and design practice, to draw on community practices to learn from them and improve our own practices, and finally to bridge the gap between metrics relevant to researchers and those relevant to communities. We argue that these and other proposals in our paper will be essential to the survival and success of this type of work in HCI and computing. That said, we see our work as a conversation starter. For those who are listening to this talk and have worked on community collaborative projects, we'd love to discuss your experiences doing this work in computing and start a larger discourse around how to better support community collaborative approaches to computing research. Thank you very much.